Another Bernie Sanders-backed progressive wins a Democratic primary, this time for a House seat in suburban New Jersey, as the party's left and moderate factions wrestle for control in the age of Trump 2. And not only in the Northeast, but Virginia, Texas, and beyond. And which side wins could affect the final outcome of the November midterms.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the Journal's opinion pages, columnists Bill McGurn and Matt Continetti, who writes for the Journal's new Free Expression newsletter. The Democratic primary last Thursday wasn't supposed to be a nail-biter in New Jersey, but it turned out that way. This is a special election in April to replace New Jersey's new governor, the former holder of the 11th District House seat, that is Mikey Sherrill, who cut a pretty moderate reputation when she was in Congress. And many observers expected her replacement to be former Congressman Tom Malinowski. But instead, the winner wasn't called for days, as the top two finishers were separated by only a few hundred votes. Finally, on Tuesday, Malinowski conceded, and the winner of the Democratic primary is Analilia Mejia, who had a late surge in this Democratic primary, particularly on her criticisms of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. Let's listen to Mejia after a Tuesday press conference.
Qualified immunity is the reason why ICE agents are acting with impunity. So in order for us to get control and to ensure that we have safety in our streets for all people, we must abolish ICE. We must turn off the spigot. We must stop the data collection. We must stop the immunity. We must have accountability.
Scanning down Mejia's campaign website, it is a familiar list: Medicare for all, free public college, canceling student debt. Bill, I wonder what you make of this as a signal where the Democratic Party might be heading. And is this an opening for a Republican candidate in this April special election? Or are these suburban areas in the second Trump administration just kind of out of reach for the Republican Party?
Well, we've been talking about what it means for the parties for years and so forth. I would say a couple of things. One, it shows how dead the Republicans are in New Jersey, and not just this election. They've been dead for years. They have not in recent memory presented to the public a coherent and comprehensive conservative strategy based on markets, enterprise, opportunity, a state that lives within its means. We just haven't had that. So we've had drift, and all the life is in the parts of the Democratic Party that are most extreme. Now, having said that, primaries usually reward the most dedicated or active, who in the Democratic Party are usually more left of center than the average Democratic voter. And then the Republican Party are usually more right of center. So in some senses, the primary in New Jersey is kind of following a pattern. But on the other hand, it's become more extreme. Now we're no longer pretending we're about reforming ICE. We're about abolishing ICE and so forth. And I think it's just going to go that direction. I don't think the Democrats are going to reform, because parties really don't reform unless they have to, unless there's pressure from the other side. Until the Republicans put forward a coherent agenda for New Jersey based on markets and opportunity, I don't think the Democrats are going to get any better. It's probably going to continue to drift to the left.
But there have been figures inside the Democratic Party who, at least in recent years, were pushing in the other direction. And one I can think of is now the Virginia governor, Abigail Spanberger. She was famously on a call with some of her colleagues after Democratic election losses saying, you know, we should stop talking about socialism, stop using phrases like that. And Matt, that's why I think it's notable also, now that she is the governor and coming into office. The Journal had an editorial recently under the headline, Virginia Governor Spanberger enters stage left, suggesting that even moderate Abigail Spanberger is kind of trying to make sure she placates this progressive faction in the Democratic Party. And I wonder if you agree with that assessment of how now Governor Spanberger is handling her first weeks in office.
Well, I think Abigail Spanberger is what you might call a MINO. She's a moderate in name only. And when she gave that cautionary word to the Democrats after the 2020 election to stop saying the word socialism, it wasn't necessarily because she disagreed with any of the policies. It was because she knew that socialism is a political loser. And she's more interested in winning than in any ideological argument. But now that she's in office, we see that Virginia is headed toward the left, a hard turn toward the left. And among her first actions in office was to say that Virginia jails cannot cooperate with ICE. She restored Virginia's participation in the Blue State Climate Compact. She has fired all of Glenn Youngkin's very, I think, qualified and capable appointees to the University of Virginia board and other higher ed boards in Virginia, all of which, by the way, these board members were trying to implement the anti-woke policies that received a national mandate in the 2024 election. And the legislature, if anything, is more left-wing than Governor Spanberger, because they're flooding her desk with bills to curtail gun rights, to raise taxes, and a whole host of other woke priorities. What it says to me is the Democrats right now are riding this wave of anti-Trump intensity. Donald Trump has empowered the most left-wing elements of the Democratic Party across the nation, whether that's in New Jersey or in Virginia. And the calling card of the Democrats last year, affordability, was an empty slogan. Because if you look at any of Spanberger's policies that she's implementing now, it's going to lead to higher energy costs. It's going to lead to higher taxes. It's going to mean more regulation. So the Democrats have been very good, I think, at spinning these slogans in elections to appeal to a statewide electorate in Virginia and Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey. But once they get in office, that left-wing base, which is really driving a lot of their victories, is in charge.
I would agree with that assessment. It does seem like the reaction to Trump has energized the leftmost faction of the Democratic Party. And one way that office holders are trying to react to that so that it doesn't catch them by political surprise in their next primary is by working with it. Let's listen to Governor Spanberger talking about her decision to cut these sorts of state law enforcement agreements with ICE.
Sadly, the bad tactics, the bad training, the bad vetting that we have seen or witnessed or perceive in places like Minnesota, that is degrading trust in law enforcement. And I want to draw a very clear line in the sand and say, I have strong trust in the law enforcement agencies of Virginia, and this is why. And this is why are the outlined principles and values that I know they adhere to.
Maybe that's what Spanberger is thinking here, Bill. That does seem to be how Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, has now avoided a real serious primary challenge. Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado had been set to take her on. And there was talk some months ago that he might have a real shot at knocking off this incumbent governor who came into office in the wake of the Andrew Cuomo resignation and his scandals. And now he has dropped out of the race. On Tuesday, Delgado left this primary challenge. He said, I do not make this decision lightly, particularly given that so many have poured their belief into our campaign and are desperate to be given a voice, unquote. But Bill, part of what seems to have changed the dynamic here is Kathy Hochul trying to cozy up to the new mayor of New York City, the socialist Zoran Mamdani, whose endorsement she has now won. And when you are the governor of New York and you win the endorsement of the progressive mayor of New York and can say, he's on my team, we're working together, that does take a whole lot of wind out of the sails of some kind of progressive challenger who wants to come at you from the left.
Yeah, let's give credit where credit is due. The mayor is frank about where he's coming from, where he intends to take New York. And Kathy Hochul eagerly sought his endorsement before the election. That gives a hint what she's going to know. Now, I think she's more of an opportunist than he is and would latch on to anything that would keep her in power. But this is the problem when you don't have a direction. the Democratic Party no longer has any animating ideas like better opportunities for the working man, just something simple like that. They're all in opposition, and all they can do is move left. The only one moving right, and it's not really reflected in voting, is John Fetterman. Like, he's the voice of reason now in the Democratic Party because he recognizes a few things. But John Fetterman still has a pretty left-wing record. I think Democrats, looking ahead, they might win some short-term battles, but a year from now, I wonder if we'll be writing about Virginia and New Jersey in quite the glowing ways we are now about Democratic chances and opportunities.
This push, though, to the sides away from the center in primaries, one place that it is playing out in an interesting way, and in both parties, Matt, I think, is this Texas Senate race that is forthcoming. And you can see it in some of the polling. On the right side of the aisle, you have the incumbent Senator John Cornyn, who's running for re-election. He is challenged by the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, who has a pretty good amount of baggage, personal and political, I think is fair to say. On the left side of the aisle, you have James Tallarico, who is more of a moderate rhetorical figure, at least. And then the progressive candidate in that side is Jasmine Crockett, Congresswoman in Texas. And it's interesting to see both parties now trying to grapple with the electability issue. Let's start just with some table setting. This is Senator John Cornyn appearing this week on our sister podcast, All Things with Kim Strassel.
The funny thing is, Jasmine Crockett said, if I'm the Republican nominee, I will win. But you're right. Tallarico is duking it out with Jasmine. Jasmine is, will say outrageous things, mainly punching President Trump figuratively in the nose every day. And of course, that gets a lot of support from the progressive or radical left. Tallarico is relatively unknown. He's a state representative from outside of Austin, and but he's got running a good campaign, and he's raising a lot of money. And typically what happens in these races, as you know, because of the small dollar contributions that flow online to the Democrats, progressive left, he will be well financed.
Matt, one poll that I've been looking at is from Emerson College, and it's only one poll, but this has John Cornyn beating Jasmine Crockett by something like 6 points, and Ken Paxton and Jasmine Crockett head-to-head, even, no real polling favorite there. And yet those are the kinds of electability arguments that primary voters, these very motivated ideological voters that Bill is describing, sometimes ignore because they really want the figure who is going to stand up and fight and say strident things on social media, even if it's a bigger challenge than to win the general election in November.
That's right. I think electability has been overrated by a lot of political prognosticators. It's definitely an issue in Democratic presidential primaries, where I do think Democratic voters are interested in the candidate who is most likely to win. But when you get to state level primaries for either party, Democrat or Republican, I think electability matters much less. Voters are more interested in the person who best represents them, and not just in policy, because as we've all noticed, policy doesn't matter as much as it used to these days in politics, but in attitude and sentiment. And this is where I think Jasmine Crockett has a real advantage, because one thing that she has oodles of is attitude. And she has made a national name for herself in her very dramatic cross-examinations of Trump officials and Republicans in the House committee. She is a MSNBC media star. She has a kind of snappy way with words that draws attention. And she also, of course, I think has won the support of the Black vote in the Democratic primary in Texas, which is very important. Tallarico may seem more electable on paper, though I find that somewhat doubtful, especially in Texas, a state that hasn't had a Democratic senator in decades. But he's someone who has been drawing more support from Hispanic Democrats, as well as kind of Democratic senators like Martin Heinrich in New Mexico, who endorsed him recently. They think that he has the better shot. When I look at these primary polls, Kyle, I see essentially a toss-up race on both sides. But there's no question when you get to the general matchups that Cornyn is the more likely candidate to win. The problem there, of course, is Republican voters nationwide are in an anti-institutional, anti-Washington posture. They've been so for decades. And John Cornyn, of course, was first elected to the Senate in 2002, some 24 years ago.
But Bill, where does that leave the analysts when they're trying to figure out who is likely to win these midterms in November, and particularly the Senate? Because the House, given the polling that we've seen on the economy and President Trump's approval, keeping the House with that narrow majority that Speaker Mike Johnson currently has, seems like at the very least an uphill climb. Republicans, given the Senate map, do have a bit of an advantage. And I guess I would say my guess is that they're still favored. But if you start to imagine a Texas Senate contest between Ken Paxton and Jasmine Crockett, where maybe it's more of a jump ball, then I start to wonder about that. I mean, just looking at the Senate map available, just looking at the seats that are up for grabs in the Senate in November, Michigan, Maine, Susan Collins there is always hard to defeat, but you know, never say never. North Carolina, Georgia, a couple of these states that perhaps people are used to thinking of as Republican states, but Georgia has 2 Democratic senators at the moment. And so, Bill, there is a lot that's at stake here for these primaries and voters that are thinking about which candidate to nominate on the Democratic side or on the Republican side, because the difference between a Republican and a Democratic Senate is the difference between, anybody that Trump wants to nominate in the last 2 years of his term for a U.S. attorney, a federal prosecutor's job, cabinet posts, judges with lifetime tenure. So there is a lot that's at stake.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the way I look at it, Democrats' job to win is to disguise how much the party is in thrall to the left. That is to say, even if you're not as left-wing as AOC or Jasmine Crockett or something, you are pulled by them in that direction for the most part. And we see that in New Jersey and Virginia now. The job for the Republicans is precisely the opposite, to show what they stand for and what they'll really govern like, as we're beginning to see, again, same states, New Jersey and Virginia, if they're elected. There are moderate Democrats who resent how left the party has grown, who oppose that and so forth, but they can't say, do we think Chuck Schumer really believes the stuff he's dribbling out now? He should be a voice of sensibility, and he's not, because he's afraid that he's going to be the one challenged by AOC in a primary. So that's the dilemma on both sides. The Republicans have to expose it. Democrats have to hide it.
Matt, there are other Democratic primaries coming up here that we'll have to see whether they show the same dynamic of a progressive figure talking about Medicare for all and abolishing ICE, knocking off an incumbent or a strong centrist, more moderate challenger on the Democratic side of the aisle. Maybe this new suburban New Jersey race is an outlier, but I have my doubts about that. And if we start to see a pattern where figures who are endorsed by AOC and Bernie Sanders start winning more of these primaries, looking like they might be in pole position to win the general election and go to Congress, it also maybe affects the thinking about what the 2028 race might look like. There are some prominent figures in the Democratic Party that seem to want to say, we saw what happened in 2020. We saw the Democratic voters. They picked Joe Biden. They did not go with a figure like Bernie Sanders. And maybe I could be that figure in 2028. Former Chicago Mayor Ambassador Rahm Emanuel seems to be kind of picking that lane. That might be what Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro is thinking. But it also raises doubts about whether that's going to continue to be a viable strategy if what started as kind of a socialist push, leave Vermont aside because Bernie Sanders has been there a while, but in New York with AOC, with Mamdani, starts to spread out to places like suburban New Jersey and who knows where next.
That's right. I mean, President Trump gave life to the squad. It was under his first term that the squad was born of socialist Democrats, and AOC won that extraordinary primary victory in 2018 against a longtime Democratic incumbent. And we just see here with the Mejia race in New Jersey that it's President Trump's second term, and we have this upset of a Bernie Sanders organizer winning over a former Democratic congressman. I expect that this left-wing drift among the Democrats is going to continue right up to the voting in the 2028 Democratic primary. And at that point, the Democrats usually veer from riding off the cliff. At least that's what happened in 2016 and 2020, and again in 2024, though in 2024 they went off a different sort of cliff, you could say. Look, I think in the Senate race, just right there, these primaries matter quite a bit, because in order for the Democrats to win the 4 seats that would give them a 51-seat majority in the Senate, and thus the ability to overcome Vice President Vance's tie-breaking vote, they not only need to hold seats in Georgia and Michigan, they also need to win a seat in a place like Maine. And we just had this week in Maine, incumbent Republican Senator Susan Collins, longtime Republican senator, do an unboxing on social media where she revealed her running shoes. So she's going to run for another term. And the Democrats face a primary choice between Governor Janet Mills, who is Chuck Schumer's favorite candidate, and a progressive kind of Bernie wannabe named Graham Plattner, who is very controversial and very hard-edged. So if the Democrats in Maine go like their co-partisans throughout the country and choose the more hard-edged progressive candidate, well, then I think Susan Collins might be happy, because in a general election, her experience, her rank in the Senate could go a long way. In Michigan, the same thing. It's a very confusing Democratic primary there for an open seat. If the Republican likely nominee actually came close to winning the seat just in 2024. The Democrats have to choose between a variety of candidates, one of whom, again, is this Bernie acolyte, a physician who's extremely vocally anti-Israel, very much on board the Mamdani Ocasio-Cortez socialist agenda. That type of matchup, I think, would also favor Republicans. So if the Democrats want to make a play for the Senate, which is difficult enough, they have to be very careful in who they choose in these primaries.
Thank you, Matt and Bill. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.